Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. This is the fourth talk in the series. Again, this is from Cittaviveka, and this is entitled The Five Hindrances. In meditation, you develop an understanding of the five hindrances. The Buddha spoke of these five hindrances on the spiritual path. They are firstly sense desire, or greed, or lust. Secondly, ill will, or anger. Thirdly, dullness, sloth and torpor. Fourthly, restlessness, agitation and worry. And fifthly, skeptical doubt. In characteristic style, Ajahn Sumedho simply talks about them rather than delivering a systematic lecture. Owing to the time limit of the talk, he did not comment on number 4, restlessness and worry. So in meditation, you develop an understanding of the five hindrances. How, when one of them is present, you investigate it, understand it, accept its presence, and learn how to deal with it. Sometimes you can just tell it to go away, and it goes. Sometimes you have to allow it to be there until it wears out. We have subtle ways of being averse to that which is unpleasant, and we tend not to be very honest about our intentions. As soon as something unpleasant arises, our habit is to try to move away from it, or to destroy it. But so long as we do this, we don't have any samadhi or concentration. It's only when these five hindrances are absent, or we are no longer attached to them, that we find any peace of mind or a concentrated heart. Only in the moment when a hindrance actually arises can you really penetrate it and have insight. You may have noticed that although you listen to teachings and gain a profound understanding of the Dhamma, you can still become angry or frightened, or feel desire for things. When an actual situation arises, you're not mindful. You tend to resist, or resent, or just judge. I spent my first year as a samanera living in a monastery in northeast Thailand. I was not required to do anything other than just live in a little hut. The monks brought me food every day, and as I could speak no Thai and nobody else spoke any English, I didn't have to talk to anyone. The senses were not stimulated to any great extent, so sensory deprivation set in, and I found myself becoming very tranquil. So tranquil, in fact, that I attained great states of bliss and ecstasy. I'd sit on the porch of my little kuti, and tears of love would well up in my eyes for the mosquitoes that were biting me. I could think in abstract terms about all the beings everywhere, and feel great love for them too. I even forgave my enemies and those who had caused me suffering in the past. I could entertain these high-minded feelings for all beings, mainly because I was not having to live with them. Then one day I had to go to the immigration authorities to renew my visa. I had to travel to a place called Nong Khai, which is where you cross the Mekong River to go to Laos. Because of my new sensitive state, as I walked to the town, I could see things more clearly than ever before. I saw the sorrow and anguish in the faces of the people, and when I walked into the immigration office, I felt an iron curtain of hatred forming in front of me. I found out later that the leading monk of the province had ordered the officials to give me a visa. This was not quite in line with the regulations, and so it had forced the officials into a position that was really quite unfair. Because of this, they had a definite aversion towards me and would not grant me a visa, which was very confusing for me because of my heightened state of awareness. The feeling of great love I had for all beings began to fade away very quickly. By the time I got back to the monastery, I was in a frantic mental state. I went to my kuti and spent the next 3 days just calming down all the feelings that had been aroused during that hour's visit to the immigration authorities. After a few months, I became very fond of the isolated life. There's something very romantic about living that way. It's so peaceful not to be exposed to the misery of people or to have your senses excited by their actions. Nature itself is very peaceful, very pleasant to be with. Even the mosquitoes, which you might think must be terribly annoying, are not really anywhere near as annoying as people are. It takes much less skill to live with mosquitoes than with another person. I became very attached to that way of life, but after a few months I had to go to Bangkok. I remember sitting in the train on the way from Nong Khai to the capital. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I just sat there with my high-minded thoughts about helping all beings, dedicating my life to their welfare, and thinking about the Dhamma and the Buddha. I was permeated by an overwhelming state of bliss. What a wonderful state to be in, I thought. But the noisy, confusing, and unpleasant city put paid to all that. In half an hour, my mind was in a terrible confusion. From these experiences I began to see that the way to enlightenment did not lie in being shut off from everything that was unpleasant, but rather through learning to understand all that we find unpleasant or difficult. Those particular conditions have been put there for a purpose, to teach us. No matter how little we want them and would like things to be otherwise, somehow they will persist in our lives until we've understood and transcended them. My hermit life ended soon after that. I was going to train as a bhikkhu and would live with Ajahn Chah at a monastery where I wouldn't be allowed the luxury of ascetic practice. I'd have to live in a community of monks and perform my duties, learn all the disciplinary rules that bhikkhus have to learn, and live under the authority of someone else. By this time I was quite willing to accept all that. I realized that in fact it was exactly what I needed. I certainly did not need any more ecstatic blissful states which disappeared as soon as anything annoying happened. At Wat Pah Pong, Ajahn Chah's monastery, I found a constant stream of annoying conditions coming at me, which gave me a chance of learning to deal with the 5 hindrances. At the other monasteries in Thailand where I lived, being a Westerner had meant that I could not... At the other monasteries in Thailand where I lived, being a Westerner had meant that I could expect to have the best of everything. I could also get out of doing the work and other mundane things that the other monks were expected to do by saying something like, I'm busy meditating now. I don't have time to sweep the floor. Let someone else sweep it. I'm a serious meditator. But when I arrived at Wat Pah Pong and people said, he's an American, he can't eat the kind of food we eat, Ajahn Chah said, he'll have to learn. And when I didn't like the meditation hut I was given and asked for another one that I liked better, Ajahn Chah said, no. I had to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and attend morning chanting and meditation. There were readings from the Vinaya too. They were read in Thai, which at first I didn't understand, and even when I could understand the language, they were excruciatingly boring. You'd hear about how a monk who has a rent in his robe so many inches above the hem must have it sewn up before dawn, and I kept thinking, this isn't what I went forth for. I was caught up in these meticulous rules, trying to figure out whether the hole in my robe was 4 inches above the hem or not, and whether I should have to sew it up before dawn. Or they'd read about making a sitting cloth, and how the monks should know that the border had to be so many inches wide. And a monk would say, well, I've seen a sitting cloth with a border different from that. The monks would even argue about the border of the sitting cloth. Let's talk about serious things, I'd think. Things of importance, like the Dhamma. When it came to the pettiness of everyday life, and living with people of many different temperaments, problems and characters, whose minds were not necessarily as inspired as mine seemed to be at the time, I felt great depression. Then I was faced with the 5 hindrances as a practical reality. There was no escape. I had to learn the lesson that they were there to teach. You would be surprised at some of the forms that the first hindrance, sense desire, takes for monks. As a layman, you can spend time trying to seek out objects that suit you. Because monks live a celibate life and have few possessions, we find our greed accumulates over things like robes or alms bowls. We're allowed only 1 meal a day, so a lot of greed and aversion may arise with regard to food. At Wat Pah Pong, we had to accept whatever hut we were given. So sometimes you were fortunate and had a really nice one, and sometimes the one you had was not very nice. But then you could watch the aversion that arose if you were given something that you didn't like, or the pleasure if you were given something that you liked. I became obsessed with robes for the first few months. The colour of my robe, believe it or not. At the monastery where I had lived before, they wore robes in a bright knock-your-eyes-out kind of orange, which was not my colour. At Wat Pah Pong they wore a kind of ochre yellow or brownish-coloured robe, and I developed a great desire for this kind of robe. At first they wouldn't give me one. I had to wear one of these knock-your-eyes-out orange robes, and I became very greedy for new robes, big robes. The robes in Thailand never fitted me properly, but at Wat Pah Pong they'd make them to your size. You'd have tailor-made robes. Finally, after a month or so, Ajahn Chah suggested that a monk make me these robes, but then I became obsessed by the colour. I didn't want it too brown, and I didn't want too much red in it. I went through a lot of sorrow and despair trying to get the right colour for the robe. Although we could not eat anything in the afternoon, certain things are allowed in the Vinaya, and one was sugar. So I found myself having a fantastic obsession with sweets, though before I'd not really cared about sweets at all. At Wat Pah Pong, they'd have a sweet drink in the afternoon once every 2 or 3 days. Once every 2 or 3 days. May the assembly notice this? Once every 2 or 3 days. And you began to anticipate the day when they would give you tea or coffee with sugar in it. Sometimes they'd even make cocoa. When word got around that we'd have cocoa that evening, I couldn't think about anything else. I didn't find sexual desire any problem in those days because my obsessions were all with sugar and sweets. I'd go to bed at night and dream about bakeries. I'd be sitting at the table just about to put the stickiest pastry into my mouth, and then I'd wake up and think, if only I had had just one bite. Before I went to Thailand, I had spent a few years in Berkeley, California, where it was pretty much a case of doing your own thing. There was no sense of having to obey anybody or live under a discipline of any sort. But at Wat Pah Pong, I had to live following a tradition that I did not always like or approve of, in a situation where I had no authority whatsoever. I didn't mind obeying Ajahn Chah. I respected him. But sometimes I had to obey monks I did not like very much, and who I thought were inferior to me. The Thai monks were very critical of me at Wat Pah Pong, whereas in other monasteries they'd praise me all the time. They used to say, "How beautiful you are," and "What beautiful skin you have." They liked white skin, and though my skin is not really very beautiful, it is white. At Wat Pah Pong, however, the monks would say, "You have ugly skin with brown spots." I was in my 30s at the time, and still sensitive to the aging process, and they asked, "How old are you?" I'd say, 33. And they'd say, "Really? Oh, we thought you were at least 60. Then they would criticize the way I walked, saying, "You don't walk right. You're not very mindful when you walk." And I'd take my bag. They gave me a bag. And just dump it down thinking, this can't be very important. But they'd say, "Put your bag down right. You take it like this, fold it over, and then you set it down beside you like that." The way I ate, the way I walked, the way I talked, everything was criticized and made fun of. But something made me stay on and endure through it. I learned how to conform to a tradition and a discipline, which took a number of years because there was always strong resistance. But I began to understand the wisdom of the discipline of the Vinaya, which is not all that apparent on reading the Vinaya scriptures. You might develop an opinion on the traditions and the Vinaya itself, thinking, this rule isn't necessary. You could spend hours of your day rationalizing this opinion, saying, this is the 20th century, these things are not necessary. And you would watch the discontent and proliferation going on inside you and ask yourself, is this suffering? You keep watching your reactions to being corrected, criticized or praised. Over the years, equanimity seemed to develop. You found that anger, annoyance and aversion began to fade out. And when your mind no longer inclines towards dwelling in aversion, you begin to have some joy and some peace of mind. As I gained confidence in the practice and the teacher, and then the monastery, I developed a kind of obsessive attachment to them. I couldn't see any faults in them, and I felt that everybody should be following them. When people came to the monastery, I'd feel it was my duty to convert them. I can understand how missionaries must feel. When you feel very inspired very attached to something that's helped you and given you happiness and insight, you feel compelled to tell everybody about it, whether they want to hear it or not. This was all right as long as the Westerners who came agreed with me. That was nice. I could inspire them and they would feel the same sense of dedication, and we would reinforce each other. We would get together and talk about our tradition and our teacher being the best, and how we had discovered something wonderful. But then, inevitably, some negative American or Englishman would come to the monastery and not accept any of this. This happened very strongly in about my 5th year there, when an American came who'd been at the Zen Center in San Francisco. He proceeded to find fault with Ajahn Chah, with Wat Pah Pong, with Theravada Buddhism, and with the Vinaya, with everything. He was quite an intelligent person, and he certainly had a lot of experience in going from one teacher to another, one ashram to another, from one monastery to another, and finding fault with them. He put doubt in the minds of people. Maybe there's a better way to do it, a quicker way. Maybe Ajahn Chah is an old-fashioned nobody. There was said to be a teacher in India who was giving meditation courses where people became Sotapannas almost immediately, making people think, I don't know if I'm a Sotapanna yet or not. If I could have a teacher come and tell me, verify, it'd be really nice to know where I am in my meditation. Ajahn Chah wouldn't tell you this. So a Sotapanna is a stream enterer. That's the first level of the 4 stages of enlightenment. So I felt strong aversion arise towards this American. I felt the need to tear down every other type of Buddhism, every other teacher, every possible alternative to Wat Pah Pong and its ways. I became very critical, and every time somebody said, I know a better system, rather than listen to why it was allegedly better, I would immediately find every possible way in which it was worse. So I developed a habit of tearing down other teachers and traditions. But this brought me no joy. I began to see the suffering in always having to defend something and tear down anything that threatens the security you find in attachment. If you never really understand doubt, the nature of uncertainty in your own mind, you may be overwhelmed by it. And when somebody says, I know a better way, a quicker way, you start doubting, maybe there is a better way, a quicker way. If this better way was described in very rational terms, you'd think, well, yes, maybe that's the way to do it. But when you're attached and feel loyal to your teacher, you think, I can't do that. It's better to do it the slow way and be sure. So then you start to put down anybody who suggests that there is a better or a quicker way. But the important thing to understand is the doubting mind. I saw that it was not up to me to decide which was the best or the quickest way to do anything, but to understand my own uncertainty. So I began to investigate the mental state that arose when doubt was put into my mind. And after a while, I began to accept any kind of doubt, regarding it as a changing condition. Once when I was in Bangkok, people were comparing religions, and I was trying to be very tolerant and accept that all religions were equally good, even though I didn't really think so. But I'd always try to say something good about how the goal is the same and that we should love the Christians and try to have metta, loving kindness, for all Christians. But I really felt that Buddhism was better. One day this bothered me because I thought, what if somebody asks you, which is the best religion? What would you say? Well, I'd say Buddhism. Suddenly it became very clear that that was only an opinion, and that opinions were not permanent conditions. They were not self, and you didn't need to have one or believe in one. I didn't have to be the authority, the one who said this was better than that. So I no longer felt any obligation to think about this or to try to figure it out. It became clear that all I had to do was to be aware of the desire to know and of the ability to say, this is better than that. Another time, several years ago, I became obsessed with jealousy. As I was the senior monk, I felt I had to set an example of perfect behavior, and I began to feel jealous if other monks were praised. Somebody might say, this monk is better than Sumedho, and I'd feel a tremendous sense of jealousy arise in my mind. Jealousy is a kind of competitiveness, a feeling that you always have to hold your own in front of everybody else. But then I found that I did not like jealousy. It was a most unpleasant condition. So I tended to repress it. I'd practice sympathetic joy, mudita. When somebody said, that monk is better than Sumedho, I'd say to myself, isn't it wonderful he's better than me? Or, how glad I am for that person, he's better off than I am. But I'd still feel jealous. So I realized that I had to look at the emotion and saw that the problem was that I was always trying to get rid of it. I decided to bring it up more. I started concentrating on jealousy. I think of every possible thing that would arouse jealousy. I kept looking at the feeling of jealousy and observing its changing nature, and after a while it began to fade out. As it disappeared, I could see that it was only a natural condition of the mind, and that it was not self. Sleepiness or mental dullness is another good teacher. Sleepiness or mental dullness is another good teacher, which appears when you no longer feel inspired by your monastic life. When you've just entered the Sangha, you feel a lot of inspiration, at least I did, and you have a lot of energy. But afterwards, you find yourself becoming very dull mentally. You start falling asleep when sitting or listening to talks. You sit and concentrate on the dullness, just letting your mind go into a dull mental state without putting any effort in, or you try to resist this mental dullness. On the moon days in Thailand, we used to have to sit up all night until dawn. At first, like a typical competitive American, I wanted to look good in front of the others, so I'd sit there and, through sheer willpower, hold myself up all night. I'd see some Thai monks sinking down, almost falling over, and contempt would arise. Pah, I'm better than that. I won't allow myself to give in to sleepiness or dullness. But after a while, the willpower would fade out, and I'd find myself sinking down and falling on my face on the floor. I'd feel aversion to this mental state and make myself stay awake by willpower. When this happens, you find yourself going into a state where you don't know what's going on and you start hallucinating. So I reflected on this hindrance, and that the real problem was that it was something I didn't like. Trying to get rid of something you don't want is dukkha. So I thought, I'll just accept it. I'll investigate the feeling of sleepiness and dullness. And though I thought I'd fall asleep and disgrace myself in front of all the other monks, I found that one can concentrate on the feeling of sleepiness itself. I would contemplate the sensation around the eyes and the feeling in the body, observing the mental condition and my habitual resistance to it. In this way, that hindrance soon ceased being a problem to me. In life, wisdom arises within us when we understand the things we're experiencing here and now. You don't have to do anything special. You don't have to experience all kinds of extreme pain in order to transcend pain. The pain in your ordinary life is enough to urge you towards enlightenment. We can regard all these feelings of hunger or thirst, restlessness, jealousy or fear, lust and greed and sleepiness as teachers. Rather than resenting them and saying, "What did I do to deserve this?" you should say, "Thank you very much. I'll have to learn this lesson someday. Might as well do it now, rather than put it off." So, another great teaching from Luang Por, and this is the way to establish the attitude towards the hindrances, to sense desire, ill will, doubt, restlessness and dullness, that to think of them as the five teachers, and that the framing of them in that way is then much more helpful than even to calling them hindrances. In a way that rather than nivaranas, we should maybe call them the five acharyas, and that because the hindrance is really what they're hindering, they're being an obstacle to, is samadhi. That's the classical reason why they're called nivarana, or obstacles. But as Luang Por points out here, that it's through working with them and learning from them that you really develop a lot of spiritual qualities. And it was also something that even though Ajahn Chah gets praised a lot in these talks and is held up as a great example, what he would often say, and I remember when somebody asked him one time, "Luang Por, you're so wise, it seems to be you have an answer for absolutely everything. You must have studied the suttas for years and years, or learned the Abhidhamma from beginning to end. How is it that you can always respond so perfectly to everybody's difficulties, and you know that people's minds so clearly and can give such good, pertinent advice?" And he said, "Oh, I've never studied the Abhidhamma, and I haven't. And what suttas I studied in the past, I've pretty much forgotten all of that. But if I have any wisdom, it's because I had a lot of defilements, and that because of having to deal with the hindrances. So of the 5 hindrances, Lumpur Cha, as a young monk in particular, even up to about his 20th year, he had a kind of 5-star grade quantities of everything except dullness and sleepiness, I think. So he was extremely lustful and greedy. He had a tremendous amount of restlessness. He could get very angry and very reactive, and had tremendous doubt. So the only one he was missing out on was dullness. I guess the other 4 were going so strong that dullness didn't really have an opportunity to get any traction, because the rest was making him so kind of hot and agitated. And so, but when he would say that, he wasn't just being nice. It was really, that was the fact. That's how he had developed wisdom, was from having to deal with a mind that was raging with lust, or it was with, viciously angry or incredibly restless and filled with doubt, just caught up in questioning and that sort of sense of agitated fretting that so easily goes on. Now, in this, as Ajahn Sujito points out in that little footnote, it's not a systematic exploration of all of the 5 nivaranas, one by one, but more Lumpur Sumedho sort of cruising around the territory. But in particular, I think his comments, he doesn't speak about it in great detail, but particularly his comments about doubt and how to work with doubt are very, very helpful, particularly if you are a doubting type, a moha charita. And as he says here, the important thing to understand is the doubting mind. I saw that it was not up to me to decide which was the best or the quickest way to do anything, but to understand my own uncertainty. So I began to investigate the mental state that arose when doubt was put into my mind, and after a while I began to accept any kind of doubt, regarding it as a changing condition. So he doesn't say a lot there about this, but this is a theme that he would frequently talk about, because like Lumpur Cha, Lumpur Sumedho was also an Olympic class doubter, and could really get sucked into a whole tangled labyrinth of confused and convoluted thinking. And so what I found tremendously helpful in working with doubt, and how Lumpur Sumedho would describe it, is to recognize that when a question comes into our mind, like, what should I do, or am I doing this the right way? Is Buddhism the best way? Should I stay at Amaravati or should I go? Am I doing the right thing? Should I do more samadhi, do more vipassana? What should I do? What's the right thing? When the mind it picks up a question like that, then we're not aware that we're doing this, but in that very picking up of a question, what should I do? What's the best thing to do? Then in buying into that question, you're then buying into the idea that the universe is now incomplete, that I've got a piece missing, that I'm a question without its answer. So when I find the answer, then I'll have found my missing piece, and then that I'll be complete. So we're like an ambulatory question, looking for its answer, sort of walking around, looking for the thing that's going to complete me. And so, and then the more that we are prone to doubting, the more that the mind gets lost in papancha, the very useful word to bring into your dictionary, Venerable Nipa Pancho's name. So papancha is conceptual proliferation. So with doubt, that's the habit of mind to just go one question after another, or just endlessly thinking and getting lost in the mental creations around an issue. So what I found tremendously helpful with Lumpur Sumedho's approach was to say, as he describes here, just to recognize doubt is a changing condition. So in that, what you're doing is you're stepping out of the text of the doubt and looking at it as a changing condition in itself. So when it says, what should I do? If you buy into the content of that, you're missing the answer. But if you step out of the content and you look at the actuality of that question, it is already a whole thing. There isn't anything missing. That question arises, does its thing, and then fades away. It's only when you buy into the content that something seems to be missing. When you look at it, the process of that particular thought, what should I do? It begins as a form and then it ends. It arises, it ceases. There's nothing missing. Right? You stepped out of the content and you're looking at the process of the question. And so when you're working with doubt in this way, the thing to do is to say, when the mind comes up with a question, what should I do? Is this time to move? Or should I sit here and endure it? What should I do? Then to recognize, this is a doubt. This is the feeling of doubting. Doubts begin and end. So that you're deliberately letting go of that, and just looking at that pattern of thought arising and passing away. And you can even, as often Luang Por Sumedho points out and suggests, like I think I was talking about yesterday about listening to the mind, you can even spell it out, like slow the whole thing down, spell it out. What should I do? So you listen to the silence before, then you state the question, what should I do? Listen to the silence afterwards. So in this, there's a sort of deliberate stepping out of the content of the doubt, and just watching it as a mental formation, just like a breath that begins and ends, or a sensation in your leg that begins and ends, or the sound of a bird outside the temple that begins and ends. It's a complete thing in itself. You don't say there's something missing from the bird song, or there's something missing from that passing feeling in your leg. It is just what it is. But when it's a doubt, because it sort of triggers the thinking mind, the attention gets drawn right in and carried away. Now, when you try to work with the doubt in this respect, then it can get difficult or testing, because the thinking mind says, you can't wriggle out of it like that. You've got to decide, should I go, should I stay? You can't just brush that aside. This is an important problem. You've got to figure it out. And when that comes up in the mind, that kind of thing, then the best way of approaching it is to say, thank you for sharing. And yes, I hear that, but this reaction is also a changing condition that arises and passes away. You can't get out of it like that. You're just being evasive. You gotta think your way through this. Well, that's too is just a changing condition that arises and passes away. You keep stepping back from it and recognizing, well, no matter how demanding, well, yes, this is a very important issue and that's fully acknowledged, but right now this is actually just a changing condition of mind. It's just a pattern of thought. And as long as you are refraining from buying into the content, then and you just keep working with a thought in that way, then you are able to really see with the eye of Dhamma, because the eye of Dhamma, the eye of wisdom, is recognizing all that arises, passes away, and is not self. It's recognizing, well, regardless of the content, it's a changing condition. It's another sand grain in the Ganges. That's all it is. And so that the way that we're working with it then is to, in a sense, shift the perspective around the doubt, so that you're in a way broadening the view to take in the whole picture. Because what happens when you get absorbed into a doubt, the universe shrinks to this one little question. I've got to figure this out. I've got to decide, what should I do? What's the right thing to do? And the universe has been unconsciously shrunk to this tiny little issue, and everything else is lost at that point. When you are able to recognize, well, this particular question, what should I do? When you broaden the view around it, then you begin to see, well, there's all kinds of different angles that you could approach the situation. And when you say, what should I do? What's this should based on? when I use a phrase like, "What's the right thing to do?" Right? Right according to what? What? Measured against what? So that there's in a sense, like getting up and walking around and looking at the chair from the front, from the side, from above, from below. You see a lot of different chairs depending on the angle that you approach it from. And so when you broaden the view around an issue, often what happens is that you realize, oh, wrong question, or there isn't really an answer. Or, oh, of course, what I really want is this, or I'm not listening to my common sense and I need to do that. So that way of letting go of doubt is, in a sense, you're uncluttering the mind, you're letting the wisdom faculty function more freely, and that, in a sense, your own common sense, your own natural attunement and understanding of the bigger picture is enabled to operate by not being obsessed on a particular tiny detail or a particular formulation, or seeing being obsessed with one little aspect of it. So this is, and I feel that this is extremely useful practice, and here we are in the group retreat time, and so we have a lot of time for formal meditation, and the nivaranas, these 5 hindrances are I'm sure frequent visitors for everybody. That not that I'm psychic, but or reading people's minds, but just working on statistics, how it is. But in particular, I felt that this was a helpful point that he touches on there, and that was worth expanding on a little. So, if people have any particular questions or doubts, if you durst voice any doubts, then please go right ahead. Yes, Mike.
I'm interested in how long Sumedho was still experiencing these very severe doubts, etc. The 5 hindrances, how many years, into, maybe more the point is, I would have thought after about 10 years or something, that a lot of this sort of thing would have all gone away. Obviously not the case.
Well, what he's talking about, I mean, to some degree, what he's talking about here is mostly events within the first 2 or 3 years, 4 or 5 years of his Dharma practice. So when he was in Nongkai and then going to join Ajahn Chah, that was all in the very first few years. But obviously some of these particular traits linger on, but most of this is referring to his early years.
Well, I find doubt very insidious, that it can, it just feeds in itself, and there's a way of getting out of the situation. It's just speaking personally, it's sort of never ending.
Yes, it can go on like one of those endless court battles that go on for weeks and weeks and weeks, with the prosecution and the defense are arguing against each other, and even when you finally get a decision, then you just have an appeal and go to a higher court.
Yeah.
And it's just one lawyer. So, on the other hand, yes, Your Honour, but on the other hand, just they're endlessly going back and forth and back and forth. And so that's why this particular approach I find extraordinary. My mind isn't so much prone to doubting. I'm not a doubting type. Like Lumpur Sumedho or Lumpur Cha had that as far more of a active thing. But when I do get into a doubt, then it's a really good strong one once in a while. Then the endlessness of it is really startling. It just goes on and on and on and on and on, endlessly piling up pros and cons. Was it this way or was it that way? Is this right or is that right? Should it go this way? Should it go that way? And you just piling up the evidence for one side or evidence for the other side, and what you discover is you can't think your way to the end of a doubt. Because it's like an endless sort of courtroom battle. The lawyers are getting paid, regardless. They're quite happy for the conversation to keep going. In fact, they get more money if they keep it going. So they that it can be like that. That there's just no end in sight, and this goes on and on and on forever. So that's why I found this simple approach of saying, well, yes, that's a very important question, but you are just a question. And you can always feel this sort of visceral resistance to that, like, you can't get out of it like that. This is an important problem, and you've got to worry about it. It's your responsibility to worry about it. So, yes, thank you very much. But you are just a question. And that with that gentle, steady patience, then to just refuse to buy into the content of the doubt and say, this is the experience of doubt. It feels like this. And also bringing the attention to the body and noticing, where do you feel the experience of that doubting and worrying? How do you feel that in the body? Where is that? What's the sensation of it? Completely irrespective of the content. Regardless of where it's come from or what the question is about. Where do you feel it? What's its texture?
I believe in the Christian faith system that faith is what is trying to use to counter doubt, but that doesn't seem to be the case in Buddhism. No. Well, Buddhism, like I was describing that the questioning practice that Luang Por Sumedho learnt from the Charles Luke books, from the Master Shu Yun retreat teachings. That when Luang Por was in the Peace Corps in Borneo, this friend of his who was in the Peace Corps in Hong Kong sent him these, what were then newly published books by Charles Luke called Chan and Zen Training. And they had the Dharma talks of Master Shu Yun from a retreat that he led in Shanghai when he was 114 years old. And then Luang Por used those talks and the meditation guidance from those talks as a meditation practice for the couple of years he was in Borneo. And that was using this question, who am I, as a meditation theme. And so that is like deliberately using doubt in order to help, in a way, create this sort of bigger picture. Like you're deliberately asking this question to help the mind to broaden its view and to drop the habitual conceptual ways of framing things. And it also that's a not just a strong method in China, also in Japan, the koan practice of in Japanese, in the Zen tradition. Also in Korea, pretty much, as I understand it, the only meditation method used in the Korean meditation monasteries is this koan practice of they use the question, what is it? That's the whole methodology of meditation, is exploring that question of what is it. And one well-known American Buddhist teacher who was a student of a Korean master, his Dharma name was No Enlightenment. And the reason why he got that name was because there's this sort of aphorism they have in Korean Zen, which is small doubt, small enlightenment. So big doubt, big enlightenment, small doubt, small enlightenment, no doubt, no enlightenment. I think it was because this guy was so hyper-confident and always had the answers for everything. His teacher called him No Enlightenment. Yeah. So that was a very helpful name for him to work on, to not always have the answers for everything, and to cultivate that doubt, great doubt, great enlightenment. So rather than doubt being a hindrance, it's a hindrance as long as you're trying to think your way to a conclusion. If you're trying to think your way to certainty, then doubt just causes endless turbulence and agitation, confusion. But if you are using the capacity of the mind to investigate, and you're putting that
that questioning faculty to work, then it becomes a very effective method for liberation. So it becomes a source of wisdom. And there's also, outside of the Zen tradition and these other things, there's also Ajahn Chah approached the same kind of practice through the development of what in the Theravada tradition is called the anicca sanya, or the perception of uncertainty or impermanence. So Ajahn Chah his own version of that kind of practice would be to say, whatever arises, just ask yourself, is that so? Whenever you find your mind saying, that's beautiful, ask it, is that so? If your mind says, well, I'm going to go to Hemel Hempstead this afternoon, is that so? So that whatever the mind takes hold of or makes a kind of fixity or certainty about, then he said, make yourself uncertain. Ask yourself, is that so? Is that a sure thing? Is that for sure? So you're deliberately developing that anicca sanya, the perception of uncertainty, and seeing that things are not just so narrow or fixed according to our concepts or our expectations or our plans. So you're deliberately causing yourself doubt in order to broaden the picture and to get a perspective on the mind's tendency to create fixed patterns. So there's later on in these talks when Ajahn Sumedho refers to how he noticed when he went travelling, people were always greeting him at the airport and saying, "Hello, wonderful to have you." And then whenever he was departing, they'd say, "Oh, please come back." He said, "Yes, I'll come back." And he'd make these plans or these arrangements to come back and visit again. He said, "Well, actually, it's more skillful to say goodbye forever, rather than I'll be back soon, or I'll see you again." And so for a while, some of you might remember, he was saying that when people would part company and they'd just come visit on the weekend, and then they sort of pay their respects and leave, and they'd say goodbye forever. And they go, "What? No, where are you going? What's happening? Tell me, Lumpur. No, are you ill?" So he had to do all this explaining. No, it's Dharma. This is just the Dhamma of uncertainty. "Are you sure? No, what did you mean when you said goodbye for?" You wouldn't have said that otherwise. What did he mean? So it caused such a kind of what in Thai they call fufu fap, the kind of agitation and flurry. You know, forget it. Okay, I'll see you next week. But it's a far more dharmic answer to response to say goodbye forever, because when we part company, we don't know whether we will meet again.
I'm sure that made a lot of Thai people very nervous.
Yeah, because of course they're compared. Well, Sri Lankan people as well. Yes, that's right. Yeah, goodbye forever. Yeah. Because people assume that he's got psychic powers, and he's foretelling that they're going to have a car crash, or he's going to have a heart attack, or we'll never meet again. But it's just being in tune with Dhamma, really. Okay, that's enough for today.